Thank you so much for joining us today to learn a little bit more about the MLC. My name is Jen Schott, and I am a songwriter based in Nashville, Tennessee, originally from Kansas. And I've had songs recorded by people like Tim McGraw and Rascal Flatts and Mickey Guyton, Eli Young Band, and many others. I've been writing professionally for 23 years and in Nashville for 26 years. And I have learned a lot over the years, not just about songwriting, but about the business of songwriting and about taking care of our songs and our copyrights. I meet often with many independent songwriters, and I always ask them, are you a member of the MLC? And it's important because there are so many income streams these days, very different from when I started, when there were just a few, but because of streaming, and very important. And we want to make sure everybody's getting all the money that's due to them because of your creations. So whether you're a independent songwriter or a publisher, we hope to answer a lot of the questions and give you a lot of information today. And I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Chris Aaron from the MLC. And again, just thank you all for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much, Jen, and thank you not only for being here and bringing your really vast experience as a songwriter in the business, working at the highest levels to the group, but also for the work you do to support the MLC. Jen is one of a significant number of songwriters who participate in one of our advisory committees. We have several, so she has been involved in helping to stand up the MLC from the beginning. And her participation ensures that we are always thinking about all the things we do from the very important perspective of those of you who are songwriters. The other night, I was at an event here in town that NSAI sponsored, and they reminded everybody their expression or their saying is it all starts with a song, and then one of the featured speakers said it actually all starts with a songwriter who writes the song. So again, for all of you who are songwriters, this is all about you, and today we're going to try to present some information about the MLC from your perspective so that you can understand not only what we do, but how all this fits in with your business. So you all have found the chat, which is great. If you have questions and you want to throw those in the Q&A, as Alec Wheatley, you have already done, kudos to you. We'll try to get to those. I will not answer that question right this second, but we will make sure we monitor the Q&A and try to get to all of the questions before the end of the hour. So I should introduce myself. I'm Chris, the CEO of the MLC. Really happy to be here. And the way we set this program up is I've got a relatively short deck that I'm going to run through that will just help align everybody with some initial foundational information. Then Jen has put together some questions that she thought would be helpful to talk about, again, as a songwriter. And then we will tackle all the questions in the Q&A. So if we get going now with the deck, we should be able to cover all of those things, and it'll be great to hear from all of you as we go. All right. All right. Well, Jen, you have a license to jump in at any time, especially if you see a question that's relevant to a particular slide. I will not be seeing the Q&A while I share my screen, but here goes. So you're an independent songwriter, and do you have music streaming? Great first place to start, and that leads to what is the MLC. So the reason why we ask about streaming, the MLC is a relatively new nonprofit organization created when Congress passed the Music Modernization Act back in 2018, and we effectively sit between the interactive streaming services in the United States and some download services, and all of you as songwriters, or if you have a partner, a publisher or an administrator, then those partners. So our job, as the graphic suggests, is to collect money from those services and then pay those monies to all of you. You as songwriters who self-administer or self-publish, and then if you have a publisher or an administrator, to your publisher or your administrator. We are administering a set of rights called mechanical rights. We are the exclusive administrator of a blanket compulsory mechanical license that's available to those digital services for digital audio uses in the US, So important to note for all of you that are active on TikTok or Instagram or other video platforms where there's a visual component in addition to the music. The rights we administer do not involve video. That's handled separately by others. We handle digital audio, and the royalties that we collect and distribute are called mechanical royalties. That's why we are called the Mechanical Licensing Collective. What does it look like right now? Well, in the 2.5 or so years since we began operating, we've put together a membership now of more than 30,000 members. We have data for more than 31 million songs, and actually it's now almost 33 million songs in our publicly available database. We process anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million new song registrations each month. And some months early on, we were processing as many as 1.5 million. So those are all of the pieces of information related to those now 33 million songs that we need from you as rights holders or your partners to be able to identify you and then connect you to the money we collect on your behalf. That money that we have collected and distributed on your behalf now surpasses more than $1.3 billion. So this is a pretty significant income stream for all of you as songwriters and for your partners. We've completed 30 monthly royalty distributions to date. So we account monthly within 75 days after the end of each month. And all of those distributions have been on time or early. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but one of the fundamental things that we do is we take data from the services involving the number of times each sound recording on those services has been streamed, and then we connect it or match it to the data we have from you for the songs that you have written. And by making that connection between the song that is featured on the recording and the recording itself, we then figure out how to pay out the royalties that we collect on your behalf. We do that now for more than 90% of the royalties we receive. So 90% of the dollars we receive, we are able to match to a song in our database, which then means that we can try to distribute that money to the rights holders involved. So that's a couple of, I guess, highlights, if you will. And I should not skip ahead without talking about data equals dollars. Because we are working with data for 32 million songs, and we are talking about digital services in the US that have more than 100 million sound recordings or products available on them, this is a massive data challenge. And without good data from you, it is very difficult, if not impossible, for us to make those important connections that enable us to pay you. So we often say data today drives the dollars, the flow of money from those services to you as rights holders. That's a really important message. But data also drives the discovery of your music. So if you don't identify your music effectively, people may not be able to find it. And so discovery is another important part of this global market, and in particular, the US market, which is so vast. Good data ensures that you are found by your fans. Your music is found by your fans. So those are two things to think about.
Hey, Chris, can I
yes.
jump in for a minute and just chime in and say, yes, that is so important that everything is logged in correctly. And as you're registering these songs, which I know we're going to talk a bit more about, but I just want to say as a songwriter, nobody's going to be more detailed about your songs than you. And when you enter, you want to make sure that all your splits are correct, that the publishing names are correct, that the titles are correct. Make a list of your songs as you're writing them. If you are pursuing a publishing deal, you're most likely going to be bringing those songs into a publishing deal. They're going to need all that information. I keep a spreadsheet. When I've been in between publishing deals, I keep a spreadsheet that lists all of my co-writers, their publishing information, the splits. And then once you've registered your songs, you want to make sure that you then go on to the MLC, Chris, and to check that database and make sure that there's not a misspelling, that the title's not wrong, that the splits are correct. I think that I know we're going to talk a bit more about that, but I just wanted to chime in like detail, because that detail is the difference between you getting paid or not getting paid. So just wanted to chime in there.
No, I'm so glad you did. It's such an important point. And again, for everybody here today, Jen is a super successful songwriter. She has written songs for some of the biggest artists in the world. It's important for her and it's important for you. And again, when we're talking about 32 million songs and counting, there are only so many words that we use to come up with the lyrics and the titles for songs, and titles are generally not long. So it's all that additional data that helps us know the difference between your songs and the other songs that were written. And it's the data that hopefully we're getting on the sound recording side that helps us to match those songs with the sound recordings that feature them. So yeah, you can't say it enough. The data is so imperative to the way the business operates today, and everyone needs to pay attention to it. And it starts with you. Again, just like the song starts with you, the information about the song also starts with you, because when you're in the room, it's just you and your other co-writers. None of us are there from the MLC. If you have publishers or administrators, they're not there. It's just you and your co-writers, and therefore you're in the best position to know some of those key pieces of information. Well, we are going to come back to that, but just briefly, I want to go over this slide because again, the business is complicated, and as songwriters in particular, it's so important to know what each organization that you might need to be connected with does and does not do. And there's a subsequent slide that we're going to share that shows some of the other organizations that work in the digital audio space, so that you can get that clearer sense of what we do versus what others do, like your performing rights organization, to name an example. So what we do, we have established and maintain a public database of musical works ownership information, essentially information about who is entitled to be paid for the songs that are in the digital market in the US. And that digital public database is accessible for you anytime. You just go to our website, click on the yellow button at the top of our website that says public search, and then you'll be taken to a very simple search screen where you can plug in your name or the name of a song and find whatever data we have for it. So that database is accessible through our homepage at www.themlc.com. Second point on the left, we administer this blanket license covering mechanical rights that's available to digital audio services that operate in the US. Essentially, all the streaming or interactive streaming services in the US are operating under the blanket license, and then a much smaller number of download services also operate under it. But many of the larger download services still handle their own mechanical rights and clearances directly with record companies. So if you have an album or a song on an album that's being sold on iTunes as a download, the royalties for that download are likely coming to you from the record company and not from the MLC. Third point on the left, we receive and match sound recording data with the song data that you provide to us in our database. So that's that fundamental exercise of making connections between sound recording and songs. And that's what allows us to then distribute the royalties that we collect. We collect digital audio mechanical royalties from those US services, and we distribute those to publishers, administrators, CMOs outside the US, so organizations like us that represent rights holders, and then to any songwriter who is self-administered. So if you're a songwriter, a composer, or a lyricist, and you handle your own publishing right now, meaning you collect royalties directly, then you can be and should be a member of the MLC. So that's the left side. Jen, any questions about that on the left before I turn to the right side of the page?
Chris, I kind of just, yes, and just kind of prompting you into what we're going to. I just wonder if you can talk a little more, just clarify a little bit more about the concept of a blanket license. What exactly, what does that entail?
Sure. Essentially, what a blanket license means is that the government has created a license for this digital services that allows them to use any song that has been created and previously recorded at least once in these US services. So wherever you are in the world, if you wrote a song and it's been recorded, and whoever recorded it the first time got that first use consent that you get to grant or deny, once that recording is out, then it can be covered by this blanket license. So the license is all encompassing, and then all of the royalties that are owed for any streams of any song on the service have to get paid to the MLC, and then the MLC takes that money and distributes it to all of you as rights holders. So that's the blanket license and how it fits into that process.
That's great, Chris. And of course, we're talking about mechanical royalties here, but as we're going into this next column, Can you just distinguish for everyone the difference between a mechanical royalty and a performance royalty?
Sure. So again, one of the challenges for all of you as creators in a business like this one is that the rights that you have are much more complicated than the product, if you will, the thing that you make. You write music, and when we all think of music, we think about listening to a song as performed by an artist at a moment in time, right? When we go to a concert, we're listening or watching artists perform songs that have been written by others often, but we experience those songs as a single thing, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is. But legally, there are different sets of rights for songwriters, and there are different sets of rights for the performers and owners of sound recordings that feature those songs. And so on the song side, a performance royalty is a royalty that you as a songwriter are entitled to when your song is publicly performed. The most obvious way that that happens, and the one that's been around for probably the longest, is radio. So anytime a song of yours has been recorded and then that song, a recording, is performed on the radio, you're entitled to a performance royalty that the radio stations pay to organizations that collect those royalties. Those organizations are called performing rights organizations. So those organizations administer performance royalties. The MLC administers mechanical royalties. We're not allowed to administer performance royalties. And because we're the exclusive administrator of the blanket license, they effectively do not administer mechanical royalties. So that's why it's important to note at the bottom, we don't replace your PRO. And these are organizations like ASCAP and BMI, CSAC, and GMR. You still need them. They collect an important set of royalties for you as songwriters. There is a digital performance royalty for sound recording owners. So this is now on the other side of the business, the sound recording, not the song. Those royalties are administered by an organization that many of you are probably familiar with called Sound Exchange. The MLC is a lot like Sound Exchange. It was modeled after Sound Exchange in many respects, in that Sound Exchange is the exclusive administrator of those digital performance royalties for sound recording owners. So again, we're not allowed to administer those royalties. Sound Exchange does that, but Sound Exchange in turn does not administer the mechanicals that we administer. So you need them and you need us. Many of you are old enough to remember physical formats when it wasn't all just music on a phone. And of course, vinyl has had quite a resurgence. Vinyl is now a larger format economically than CDs are, which is sort of amazing for those of us that began our musical lives listening to vinyl. We went from vinyl to cassettes, where there's an 8-track blip in there, to CDs, and then we went to digital, and now vinyl is bigger than the physical formats that I mentioned. So we don't administer, we're not allowed to administer mechanical rights for physical products to the extent that your songs are on LPs or CDs or cassette tapes or even an 8-track. That gets handled separately, generally by the record companies that release them. And as I said earlier, we do not administer rights related to audiovisual products. So for any services that feature video like TikTok or Instagram, or the video portion of YouTube, because YouTube now has both its traditional video platform, and then it also has a subscription audio service, much like Spotify's, Apple's, and Amazon's. We don't handle the video stuff, just the audio. Last point on the right, we only administer these rights for uses of your songs in the US. So to the extent your songs are available on digital services outside the US, that also falls outside the scope of what the MLC can do. So there's a lot there. We're going to cover this again in a moment in a different slide that'll be easier for you to see the picture of. But again, the MLC doesn't replace your PRO. The MLC does not replace Sound Exchange, and they can't do the things that we do. So you want to make sure as a business owner that you are connected to all of these revenue streams and all of the organizations that administer them for you.
Yes, Chris. No, and boy, we are in a time where think of all the DSPs and all of the ways digitally that songs are being consumed. So it's incredibly important for songwriters. It's really an exciting time for songwriters because our music there's so much access to our music, more than there ever has been. But because of that, yeah, we're very grateful to the MLC for tracking it all. When I started, it was CDs, it was cassettes, and radio, and that was really it in live performance. And there's so much now. And so Chris, thanks to you and everything that the MLC does to track down every single stream.
a part of it, right? There's a lot of parts. So let's keep going. And again, this is the slide that I think will help. Know that there are 4 ways that you can get paid when your songs are used on digital audio platforms. 2 of those ways relate to you as songwriters and your songs, but because many of you also perform for recordings, you also get paid 2 ways as a sound recording owner or performer. This is the slide that lays out that landscape. So again, this is not the full picture of everything in the music industry. This is just looking at the digital audio slice of the industry. But again, that piece of the industry is rather big. And as you can see on the left side of the screen, there are all the PROs. They collect and pay you performance royalties. The MLC administers blanket mechanical royalties for you for digital audio uses. On the song side, on the right side, if you make a recording and you put it up on those services, you're likely working with a distributor or an aggregator. Think services like TuneCore or CD Baby, Symphonic. There are many, many, many of those. They're how you get your sound recordings up on these platforms, and they will pay you a share of the revenue that those sound recordings generate when they are streamed. And then, of course, if you have a record label, that money might go through your label. And that 4th stream on the right is the sound exchange piece, the digital performance rights for sound recording owners. So again, there's a lot to unpack here. We could spend an hour just talking about this slide, but the good news is if you want to get a copy of this, take out your phone right now. That QR code should work, and you can take a copy of that right onto your phone. If you're not watching on your phone or don't have your phone handy, it's on our website as well, and we'll put the link in the chat for you to get it there. If you come to events that we do, we often carry little printed cards on cardstock that have that diagram. So there are lots and lots of places where you can get this. And hopefully, if I can go back for just a minute, at a minimum, just say, okay, I write songs. Do I have a PRO and do I have a connection to the MLC? If you can answer those 2 questions, yes, then you should be getting at least 2 of these royalty streams. And then again, if you're on the sound recording side and you have performed for the making of sound recordings, if you are the owner of that sound recording, you should be getting money from your distributor. And then you should also be signed up with Sound Exchange to make sure you're getting the money that they administer. So just making sure that you know how you're connected to these 4 revenue streams, which involves having connections with the organizations listed, will go a long way toward ensuring that you're getting paid properly for all of these types of uses. Jen, any questions about this before we move on and get to what is a nice set of questions that you have and also in the Q&A?
Yes, we've got a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A, and I think leading into what's next, I'm just curious, correct? Well, I know the answer, but, and I know this was in the chat as well. Is there a fee to belong to the MLC? What does membership look like?
Great question. The answer is membership is entirely, completely, 100% free. And that is not a joke, and that is not like a trick or a pitch. When the advocates for all of you were working on the MMA, the law that led to the creation of the MLC, one of the key points that they secured was that the digital services who operate in the space would have to separately pay for all of the MLC's operating costs. So unlike all of the other organizations that you see listed on the slide right now, and that's not a knock on them at all, to be clear, but unlike all of them, our operating costs are funded entirely by digital services so that you pay nothing to receive the royalties we administer. We do not take any administration fees of any kind from the royalties that we collect on your behalf. So it's 100% free.
No, that's great, Chris. That actually answered a couple of questions that are coming through in the Q&A. Larry was asking how the MLC gets paid, and that just answered that. And when you become a member, this is a question that I had, but I see that someone else had a similar question. Could it be possible that before you're a member that there's some of your songs already in the MLC database?
Absolutely. So remember, of course, that to the extent that you co-write with another writer, it is entirely possible that your co-writer, or if they have a publisher or an administrator, they will register your song first before you do. And so by the time you go to register the work itself is already there, and all you have to do is claim your share of the work, right? And ideally, we want to have one work registration per song with all of the shares in that single registration. We don't want individual registrations from all the writers. And one of the challenges we have around the data, given the number of these registrations we get every month, is making sure that we are looking for and addressing any duplicate registrations. A case where if you and I wrote a song, Jen, and you registered your half share and I registered mine, that there would be 2 registrations for our song in the database. That's not a good situation, because if we then match uses of that song to 1 registration, only one of us will get paid, the other won't. So that's one of the reasons why you might see songs you've written already in the database. The other is because we had a very short period of time to stand all this up, less than 18 months essentially from the time that the MLC was designated to be this organization, and then the time that the blanket license became effective, we started by purchasing a data set that was already in existence, so that we weren't starting from scratch. We purchased that data set from Harry Fox. Someone in the question asked about Harry Fox, so I'll touch on that in a minute. But that was a way for us to start the process without starting completely from scratch. While there would have been benefits to starting from scratch, one of the big detriments would have been, A, the time it would have taken to do that, and B, the fact that all of you who had already been collecting royalties in this space would have had to have started from scratch by redelivering all your data. So by starting with the data set from one of the companies that had previously been working in this space, we were able to shortcut that process and at least start with something. And that something was about 17 million songs and change. So again, we've almost doubled the size of the database since we started, but some of those songs could have come from that data set that we purchased at the very beginning. To answer then the question that I think I remember seeing, Harry Fox is another company in the industry that handles administration and that may be paying you royalties. They, along with a second company called Music Reports, or MRI, those are companies that previously were hired by digital services to administer mechanical royalties before the MLC. They still exist and administer a host of rights that may be relevant to you, particularly in those video service spaces. So know that HFA and MRI still exist. They still play a really important role in the industry. And if you are getting paid by them, you should maintain your connections with them, because those are revenue streams that potentially you can only get from them. So hopefully that answers the question that we got early on. Jen, anything else before I get to the end of the deck, which is almost here?
We're almost there. No, just one more question just about the registering. Someone, I believe it was Corey, if I scroll back through, was asking if we should register songs with the MLC before or after it's on a streaming platform.
Ideally before, because again, once that song or the recording of your song has been made available on the service, it can be streamed immediately. And once that first month of its availability is up, we'll have royalties for you. So ideally, you would register the song in advance of its release. Now, that doesn't mean register every song you've ever written, because there may be many songs that you have in your notebook or on your phone file that are still works in progress, or that you haven't pitched to an artist if you're not the artist. And so there is no recording and there's no plan for recording. So I would say, again, as a business person, what you want to do is get that song registered as soon as you can, once you know it's going to be released. And if you're the one releasing it, obviously you can control that. If it's being cut by someone else, once you know that cut is going forward, that's a great time to get the song registered, so that ideally all the data we need for you is set up when it starts to get streamed, and that will allow us to start paying you royalties as soon after those first streams take place. Okay. Any others before we wrap up the the deck part of it?
I think let's keep moving, and then we'll get to some of these other questions.
Okay. So let's go past the QR code. So being a member, again, if you are a self-administered or a self-published songwriter, for any of those songs that you handle yourself, you can sign up to be a member of the MLC. You can register those songs or claim your shares, and you can check your data, and then we'll pay you royalties. If you are published or have an administrator, they should be a member of the MLC already, so that they can collect those royalties on your behalf. If you are solely published or administered, meaning you don't do any of this on your own, someone else handles all of the administration of your rights, then you don't have to be a member of the MLC. Just make sure that your publisher or administrator is. But again, for many writers, and Jen, you alluded to this, even when you have publishing deals, there may be periods of time in between your publishing deals where you're self-administered. And you can then become a member of the MLC and register those songs. And then when you get a new publishing deal, you can either roll them into your new publishing deal or you can keep them on the side. But the question about whether you should become a member depends on whether you self-administer even one of your songs. If the answer is yes for one song, then you can and should be a member. And so that's going to encompass many, many songwriters.
Absolutely. Well, and even if you're not, even if you've solely been published by publishers, Chris, you can still access the portal and search. Am I correct? So that you can get on and look and make sure things are, that your song is in there correctly. And I believe Alan had a question about, you know, can we search these databases to see if the co-writers or the co-publishers added it correctly by another party? You know,
you can and should.
Check, right?
Yep. So this slide shows a screenshot of our homepage on the website at a moment in time. And even though it highlights the blue button that says connect to collect, that's the button you click to begin the membership process. You can see right next to it is that yellow button I mentioned that said public search. So we encourage every songwriter, regardless of whether you are self-administered or published, look yourself up, right? This is the one moment when Googling yourself, but in our case, looking yourself up in our database is a good thing. It's not obnoxious. It's not narcissistic. You want to do it so you can see all the songs that we've got registered for you. And that's how you can make sure that your publisher has the right information, right? And in that way, think of it as a partnership, right? You hired a publisher or an administrator to help you do this, but you're making sure they've got all the information they need to do it correctly. The example I often use now, it's no different than if you owned a few apartments and you're renting them out, you wouldn't necessarily collect the rent and do the work to maintain them. You'd hire a management company. But if you don't tell the management company the addresses of the apartments, they can't do any of that work. So you still want to be involved and make sure that your partner has all the information that they need to then collect and administer things for you correctly. So that's something you can do for free from our website, even if you have a publisher. Just to finish up the rest of this, again, membership is free. We touched on that earlier. You essentially set up a user account, just like you would any other website, with a username and a password, and then we help you set up your member profile. There are lots of additional details about that I won't cover, but if you have questions, we have a phenomenal support team. They are available 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and they respond really quickly, like, you know, within seconds or minutes, not within hours or days. So reach out to the support team and they will walk you through the process, answer any questions you have, and make sure you get set up. Again, we've got more than now 31,000 members. Most of those are self-administered songwriters. So the process works for them and it can work for you. So again, how to learn more about us, that's our website URL. Lots of information on the website. Those again show you the 3 buttons at the top, the public search, the connect to collect to join. And then once you're a member, you can click on that gray portal login button to go right to your member account. And then we're on social media. You can follow us on any of these platforms. We've put lots of helpful information up. We do not clutter your feed with dances or memes. If it's not business related, we don't post it. So it's a great option for you. Follow us on your channel of choice and keep up with the latest information. Here's the information about our support team. So again, you can call us on the phone. There's a form on our website you can use to start an email chain, and then you can chat with us once you become a member in our portal. There's a little chat feature. So pick one of those, whichever you're most comfortable with, and let us help you in any way that we can. All right, so Jen, we have our work cut out for ourselves between your questions and the Q&A. You tell me where you'd like to start.
Yes, well, I've kind of asked some of my questions. I think I'd love to get to some of these Q&A questions. We've got a lot in the chat here, and some good ones. So I'm going to kind of just start going through those if that is okay.
Yeah.
Maria is asking about if you could give an update on the notice of termination, and for those that don't know what that is, maybe explain that.
The notice of termination, I'm actually not sure. I wonder if that means the statutory terminations process, Maria. I'm going to assume that's what it means. But maybe in the chat you can let us know if that's what.
Maria. while we're figuring that out, let's move on to another question. So Alan is asking, how long will the MLC hold funds collected for those unmatched titles to pay through, even, even if a song is later registered and then matched?
So right now we have royalties that are unmatched that date back to January of 21. That's when we began administering the blanket license. But we also have some royalties that can date as far back as 2007, because the law gave DSPs the option of delivering all of their remaining unmatched royalties to the MLC, along with the data for those royalties. And that amount of royalties for those prior historic uses totaled $427 million. So today, all of that is available for you to claim. And when you sign up for us and you register, you have the ability to search all of that data in our matching tool, whether it be the blanket unmatched or the historical unmatched. At some point in the future, we will likely put timeframes around the amount of time we take before we eventually distribute any remaining royalties to the members we have already paid. That was the mechanism that the law created. The law doesn't allow us to use those remaining unmatched royalties to offset our operations costs or to rebate money back to the DSPs. We can't spend that on education. We can't give it to advocacy groups. The only thing we can do is redistribute that remaining money to people we have paid, rights holders. But that's something that is at least a year and a half away, if not more. So right now, you don't have to worry about that. All of the unmatched royalties that we have accrued are available for you to collect. So the key is get your songs registered and then use the matching tool to look for those royalties. I see a question that was right above that one that I want to answer real quickly, if that's okay, Jen. It was from Suzanne. And Suzanne wrote it, this seems relevant only to US songwriters and not UK where you live. That is not necessarily true, but thank you for staying up later in the evening to join us. The songs on the US market they are written by songwriters all over the world. And so the question for you, Suzanne, and others outside the US becomes, have you already authorized someone to collect these US mechanicals on your behalf? Or do you want to collect them yourself? Now, in the UK, you could very well, and I'm sure you are a member of PRS, which is the Performing Rights Organization in the UK, another wonderful longstanding organization. They also administer mechanicals on behalf of MCPS, which is the Mechanical Collection Society in the UK. So if you've signed up with MCPS and PRS, those organizations are members of the MLC. They could be collecting your US mechanicals from us and then paying them to you. But if you wanted to do it directly with us, there's nothing on our end that prevents you from doing that. So for anyone outside the US, you just need to decide, do you want to use your local society or a regional society that you might affiliate with, or do you want to do this directly? Or of course, with a publisher or an administrator. So this could be relevant to you. It's certainly relevant for you to know the answer to the question, how are those mechanicals getting to you? And that's, I think, a great question to make sure you know the answer to. Jen, you want to pick another one?
Yeah, so Charlie had, I thought, an interesting question. Does the MLC collect royalties for music that doesn't have lyrics? Because, I know as a country songwriter, all my songs have words, but there's a lot of music being composed that might just be instrumental. So what does that look like with the MLC?
Absolutely. And that's why we sometimes refer to songwriters, composers, and lyricists, because we recognize that, one, you as a writer might only write the music or the lyrics, and two, there might only be music. So any musical work that falls under that definition in the copyright law can receive mechanical royalties. We collect them for you, and you're entitled to be a member and to receive your royalties from us for those instrumentals. And again, if you wrote lyrics and that's all you did, and you're like, I don't do music at all, it doesn't matter. You're still entitled to royalties, again, if you have a share of the song as the lyricist.
No, that's great. Well, and while we're talking about royalties, I do have a question. Chris, what are the current, can you tell us about the current rates for streaming and digital, mechanical, and performance royalties right now? Like, what are those rates looking like?
So the short answer is the rates are pretty complicated. And the reason they're pretty complicated is because each rate formula has multiple steps, and then the formulas vary slightly depending on the type of service involved. So as an example, if your music is streamed on an ad-supported streaming service, the rate formula for ad-supported services is different from the rate formula for a subscription streaming service, a service where a consumer pays 10 or 11 or 12 bucks a month for access to music. But in general, every one of the rate formulas ultimately results in a small, and an accurate word would be a micro penny payment per stream that we use to determine how much in royalties you're entitled to. And that calculation of a per stream rate is something that we perform each month on a service by service, offering by offering basis. So the per stream amount that you get this month on Spotify's subscription service may be different than the per stream rate from last month's subscription service. Similarly, the rate for the ad-supported streams this month may be different from the ad-supported stream rate for 2 months ago or 4 months ago. But we do all of that math behind the scenes. We make sure the services are paying the right amount. And then each month when we distribute royalties, one of the things that we give you is an individual rate sheet for every service and every offering on every service that shows you the relevant data points that we use in those formulas. And then at the very bottom, the per stream amount. So if you want to delve into that and how it works, we give you all of the data points you need to fill in those formulas and then to see how we calculated that per stream rate. And then you can also see that per stream rate multiplied by the number of streams that were reported for your songs, and then see exactly how we arrived at the amount in royalties we're paying you on each song. So that's a high-level explanation of the rates. The other thing that's important to note, the rates are set in 5-year periods. New rates that were recently negotiated and adopted took effect in January of this year. The first month that those new rates became effective were in the royalties we distributed in April, because again, for uses in January, we report 75 days after the end of January, which is April, and most rights holders should have seen a jump, if not a significant jump in their royalties as a result of those new rates. The rates increased probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 40%, depending on the service and the service offering type. So, so that was certainly good news. And then
That's very good.
Yes, no, it was phenomenal. It was a huge accomplishment for your advocates and the services that agreed on those new higher rates. And then the rates for the last 5 years are those were just recently resolved a couple months ago. I know it seems crazy, but the way that this worked is the rates that you were entitled to receive royalties for from uses that took place between 2018 and 2022, they were not settled until a couple of months ago in 2023. And so at some point in the future, we will go back and adjust the blanket royalties that we've distributed for the first 2 years that we've operated. That'll get us back to January 21. And then the services will revise the data for the historical royalties they gave us for 18, 19, and 20. And then we'll process all of that. So there's still a little bit of work to be done on the previous 5 years, but your current rates are in effect, and we are paying you at those highest ever rates.
That's great, Chris. Thank you for that. It is, I know it's not easy. People sometimes say, well, what do you make on a song? What is a stream? And there isn't a simple answer, because
Yes.
there are so many different forms of royalties and so many different platforms. Speaking of platforms, we have a question from Leroy, who's new to this and new to songwriting. And he says that he's on most of the streaming services, but wants to know maybe some examples of organizations that the MLC collects from. So could you just name a few that are?
Sure. Spotify, Apple Music streaming service, Tidal, Pandora has a streaming service, an interactive streaming service. Amazon, the Smithsonian, I think, has a service, a smaller service. Beatport, SoundCloud. There are I think there are more than 50 services now that are reporting royalties to us. You can see the names of all of them on our website. So there's actually a page on the website, and one of my colleagues is already ahead of me, where you can view the list of the DSPs that have sent those notices to us indicating they want to operate under the blanket license. And then again, in your royalties module in your portal account, we make available each month a list of all of the DSPs whose royalties are included in the distribution. So in any given month, you can open that up, print it out, and see a list of all of the DSPs whose royalties we've distributed. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Jen, I just saw a question from David that I want to touch on. It's actually a couple. So, but the first one I want to talk about, because I didn't cover this before, David said, I have received royalties from ASCAP for that song. And there may have been a reference, I think it was in a previous comment, to one of my songs being used in a large number of TikTok videos. Who monitors that kind of use and pays? So for video services, other organizations do that. Sometimes the platforms hire companies like Music Reports or HFA to administer things. Some companies like YouTube handle it themselves. It really depends on a platform by platform basis. But here's something important. For digital audio uses on these streaming services I just mentioned, you actually get paid twice as a songwriter. You get paid performance royalties. So in your case, David, as an ASCAP member, you would get paid performance royalties from ASCAP for that stream of your song on Spotify. And then the MLC would also have a royalty for you for that same stream, a mechanical. So know that even if you're seeing activity on your ASCAP statement for Spotify, that doesn't mean that you're good. That means you got a portion of your money for those digital audio streams, but you still need to get the mechanical royalties from us or through someone that you've hired to connect with us. Maria said karaoke. Karaoke, in the sense that it is an instrumental version of a song, can also be covered by the mechanical license if it's made available on these digital audio services. So again, as the writer of a song that someone records as a karaoke version, you'd be entitled to mechanicals on streams of that karaoke version, just like you would if Blake Shelton recorded one of your songs and someone streamed the Blake Sheldon version of your song. So a recording of your song is a recording of your song, and we'll pay you the royalties for those two. Dylan also had a comment, is there an automated process for identifying and merging duplicates? Yes, but doing it is really hard. So it doesn't mean that there aren't duplicates we have not yet identified and merged, which is why, again, it's so important to look at the data, because the volume of data makes it very difficult to find automatically every single duplicate, especially if the data that different parties submit doesn't all line up. Something as simple as a one-word difference in the title may prevent us from making the connection. Or if when you register, you only list your own name. You can't collect and register songs or royalties for a co-writer, but you can list them as the co-writer when you register the song. If you don't do that and your co-writers don't do that, then all we have in common is a potential title name. And that may not be enough for us to make the connection, because as you can imagine, there could be dozens and dozens of songs with the title Dreams, as an example. And we're not going to know that that registration for Dreams is the same as another one for Dreams when there are thousands of registrations for songs that are called Dreams. So yes, we look for them. Yes, we have automatic processes for trying to do it. But yes, there are still many that we have not yet found. And to the extent you can find them and let us know, that certainly helps us connect those dots for your benefit. And we want you to do that. For duplicate writers, Dylan, because you're asking some great questions, when we prompt you in the registration process to provide a writer name, we actually require you to search the writer name in the database first. So ideally, what that's doing is that's allowing you to find the existing writer name so that you don't use a different one. But of course, there can still be issues. And that's why, going back to what Jen and I were talking about, when you go to a session and you write, it's really important that you take a moment to be formal, right? And you might have known Jen for years, and she's like Jen double N, because her first name is spelled Jenn. But at some point you want to be, okay, Jen, just get real with me and remind me again, what's the name you use as a writer? What's your full legal writer name? Because it's probably not Jen Schott. And if you list on your kind of song sheet that you give to your publisher that you registered Jen Schott, but she is then registering her song, her shares of the song as Jennifer Schott or Jennifer something Schott. Jen, I'm forgetting your full writer name. That potentially creates a disconnect because again, the system won't automatically know that Jen Schott is Jennifer something Schott. And even worse and more challenging, what if Jen Schott decided that she was going to be cute and appeal to the drinking crowd and change her last name to S-H-O-T, but her writer name is spelled S-C-H-O-O-O-T-T, the way it is on screen. Now you've got a situation where you've used the performer name or the professional name, which isn't the name that she operates under as a songwriter when she collects royalties. And now we don't have any way of connecting those dots. So again, knowing how your co-writers list themselves when they are in these databases, when their songs are registered, and using that name is a really important, easy step that you can take with your co-writers. And you can start by saying, hey, just for the record, this is how I identify myself for writing. So if you give this session to your publisher, tell them this is how I spell my name.
That's
Jen,
right.
I'm sure that happens all the time for you, right?
Does, yes. I've seen things register, even on albums, on the information, right? On that data, sometimes I'm listed as Jennifer Schott, sometimes I'm listed as Jen Schott. And of course, at that point, it's too late, but then I have to make sure either my publisher is double checking it and myself. Again, I can't reiterate enough how important it is, regardless of if you're published or not, to get onto the MLC portal and check your registrations, and also with your PRO. I have had titles with, instead of Till Waking Light, it was Till Walking Light. Well, where's the money going to go? That's the wrong title, and so just, be diligent on those things, because there could be money waiting out there for you, and it's just because something's misspelled.
David, thanks for joining. And obviously, as we get to the end of the hour, if some of you need to drop, totally fine. I'll just say thank you right now to Jen for joining us, and to all of you for being here. We do lots of these, so please know that there are other webinars in the future you can join if you still have questions and you can't hang around longer. The support team can also answer any questions you have that we may not get to. And we'll also stay on a little bit longer to try to answer a few more of these questions. But thank you all for being here, and please let us know in the future how we can help. But Jen, I'll go back to you to pick another question from our Q&A. There are still 12 there that we could grab.
Yeah, Chris. So Alona had a question and said that as a member of the MLC, but just signed TuneCar as the publisher. And do you still need to register songs through the MLC, or let TuneCar do that? Who would do that at that point?
So that's a great question, Alana. If you go back in your mind to that slide that we shared that shows the 4 ways you get paid, TuneCar in the first instance, like other independent distributors, is a sound recording company. They are how you get sound recordings of your songs to the digital services like Spotify, Apple, Amazon. Most of the services will not accept music directly from you. It needs to come through one of those companies. Many of those companies, because they now have a relationship with you as a creator, they have begun to add publishing administration services to the services that they offer. So they started out saying, we'll get your sound recording up. Now they're saying, we can also collect your mechanicals from the MLC if you'd like. So that's an optional service that you can elect to have them perform for you. If you have done that, then you don't need to register the songs with us. Presumably, they are registering the songs for you with us. But as I said earlier, you can and should check to make sure that they did that and the data is accurate. So it's another example of how you have many more options, but you have to decide if that's the right option for you. And there are certainly pros and cons, right? Once you sign up with a company like that, you may then commit to let them be your administrator for a year at a time. And then if something happens in the next 6 months, let's say you write a song and a recording of that, hits big, and now all of a sudden publishers are interested in signing you, your publishing deal might have to work around that existing deal. In other words, you might not be able to have the publishing deal start until after the rights that you've given to that distributor end. Or if you have a big sync opportunity, that might have to run through the distributor, and you can't do that yourself. So you have to think about those things and whether that's the right choice for you at this moment in your trajectory, your business career. but it's an option. And again, I want to stress what's great today is you have many more options to solve for that diagram than you did 10, 20 years ago. So know that those companies may offer that service. Some of them don't. DistroKid, to my knowledge, still does not offer any publishing admin. So if you use DistroKid, which is a very common platform, they are not handling your publishing. And so unless you have chosen a different company to administer your publishing, you are literally missing out on these royalties if you recorded a song you wrote and you put it up on the digital services using DistroKid. So make sure you know what those companies that you have engaged are doing for you. Great question, Alana.
Very good question. Do we have time for a couple more, Chris?
Yeah, I see another one from Alana, and I'm hoping that one of our colleagues behind the scenes can kind of knock these out just so we reduce the list. But Alana asked, I originally copyrighted an album as musical work. Do I need to re-copyright it as a sound recording to get my sound recording royalties? So Alana, you're asking a very interesting question that highlights the difference between the process of registering a copyright with the Copyright Office, which is a legal step that helps you protect your rights, particularly if someone infringes on them, and then the process of getting set up to receive royalties from organizations that administer your rights. So technically, you don't have to register a copyright in your song to collect royalties from the MLC. If you've done it, it's great. But you don't have to do that, and we don't require it to pay you royalties. Similarly, you shouldn't have to register the sound recording copyright with the Copyright Office to get paid your sound recording royalties, whether it be by your distributor or by Sound Exchange. So again, registering your copyright with the Copyright Office is a separate legal step you can take to protect your rights, but it doesn't directly impact or prevent you from being paid royalties. Hopefully that gives you enough information. Charlie, you asked a great question, and I'm going to not answer it only because it's a great example of how complicated the business is. So you say Spotify is a new AI DJ service that plays music based on listening habits. Would this be considered non-interactive streaming? I would say it probably isn't. Because even on the subscription service where there are playlists and you can sort of press play, because you're accessing that within their subscription streaming service, it falls into what we do. But that's an example of a nuance that makes what we do often complicated. And again, if it was a non-interactive stream, Sound Exchange would collect sound recording royalties for you, but it wouldn't collect your mechanicals. So again, you also have to be clear on what right or set of royalties you're thinking about and the organization that collects them. So again, there's a bit to unpack there. And what I would say for now is it's great that you know the difference between non-interactive and interactive, and make sure that you're connected with all the organizations that pay you. And then if you have specific questions, you can call us on our support line to ask about them. You can call Sound Exchange. I'm sure they can also tell you all the companies that they collect royalties from. And then, you know, every year now, new services crop up, and we're trying to figure out which rights they need and therefore which royalties they have to pay. So that's a whole other part of what we do. Gregory, if you operate under different composer names, that's fine. Just list the name that you write under. It's possible for you to write under multiple names. There are pros and cons to that. So, you know, I would definitely think about that with an advisor before you do it, because there can be downsides, but it's possible. Russell, you're a member and registered using the bulk registration, but only one of your songs is listed in your catalog. I would call the support team, because if for some reason the bulk registration process did not work the way you had hoped, we should be able to help troubleshoot that and figure it out for you. So please call our support team. And then Gregory asks, what is the difference between publishing with a publisher and having a publishing administrator? That's a great question. I'll start it, but Jen, you should speak to this as a published writer. Administrators and publishers all have some responsibility to collect money for you. But publishers do a whole lot of things that administrators don't do. Jen, what would be some examples of that?
Yeah, so a publisher almost acts as an agent and a representative for the songwriter. They are scheduling our collaborations. A lot of what they do are scheduling. And the biggest thing of what they're doing is they are promoting our songs. They're pitching our songs, getting those songs placed, pitching to them the labels, the management, the artist. And there's also, and you know, an administrator is obviously very important because they are giving the permission, giving the licenses, tracking everything. But those deals look different. So if I'm a published writer, the percentage agreement that I am negotiating, the split, right? How much ownership I have versus the publisher is going to be a different percentage and a larger percentage with the publisher than it is with just if you're going into a deal, just strictly a publishing administration deal, where they're not going to be pitching my song to Sony Records. They're just going to be doing
or setting up co-writes. I mean, there's a host of things that they do to help you manage your creative life that an administrator doesn't do because they just focus on the money. So,
and you said it, the word manage. I mean, a publisher, music publishers are almost kind of songwriter managers, if that helps that.
There are also some fantastic managers who manage songwriters, and I would encourage you to look into those because, again, this is complicated. It is not easy by any means. Hopefully you leave today understanding a little more than you did when you got here. But know that we know it's complicated and we try really hard to explain it in ways that make sense. So again, go to the website. There's lots of great information there. There are short videos, long videos, there are infographics, just lots of things that we do to try to, again, help you understand this so that you can connect with us and get paid. Maria, thank you so much. I'm sorry it took a minute for me to get back to it, but now I see your question. So this is a little bit of a niche question, but it's a really important one. So as songwriters, even if you assign your rights to a publisher, there will come a point when under the law, you can terminate those prior assignments and get your rights back. And the reason that that provision of the law exists is because the law or Congress wanted to make sure that if at the time you signed that publishing deal, you didn't have a lot of leverage, and then you went on to become wildly successful, you had a second chance to decide what you wanted to do with those rights. In other words, and here's a way to think about it. Like imagine if you had to pick the company you were going to work with for the rest of your life when you were 18. How many of us would be happy with the choice we made at 18 when we were 40 or 50 or 60? And the answer is probably not many of us, because most of the things we decided to do when we were 18 are not things that we look back on and think, good decision, or at least not a good decision to live with for the rest of your life. That's why tattoos are something that are always so risky, right? Your kid's like, I want to have a tattoo. It's like, you're going to have that tattoo when you're old and gray, hopefully. Is this really what you want to have on your foot? But that's an aside. So the termination right is the right to get back the rights that you previously assigned so that you can either exploit those rights on your own, meaning manage it yourself, or give those rights to someone new. And if you're a really successful songwriter, that can be a very lucrative moment for you. So unfortunately, the law was not very clear around what happens when a songwriter terminates their rights if those rights were already covered by the blanket license that Congress put into place 2.5 years ago. And the Copyright Office weighed in on that a year ago and said, we are going to decide that. The MLC had previously not decided the answer, but we said, look, while the answer is unclear, here's operationally what we're going to do to keep money flowing to you as a writer through your either former publisher or your current publisher. And the office said, no, we're going to answer the question. A year in, they have not answered the question. This is in what's called the rulemaking process. But because the office has said they're going to answer the question, they effectively put us in a position where we did not feel like we could keep paying royalties out where there are disputes related to those terminations, because we don't know what the answer is going to be. So that's why we've been holding those royalties. Now, if you and the prior publisher whose rights you have now terminated agree that going forward you should get all the money, you can bring that agreement to us and we can honor that agreement. But if there's a dispute over that and it's not clear, you haven't agreed with them, then that puts it in this bucket where we don't know yet what to do because the office is in the process of answering that question. And that is not ideal because it's been some time, but that's where we are. So there's certainly more we could talk about offline about that, Maria, but that's the status as of today. That issue is with the Copyright Office to decide. And while there are disputes or disagreements over the outcome, we're waiting for the office to decide how that we should treat those disputes. Thanks for hanging around, or at least I hope you hung around to hear the answer. And please contact us if you have other questions. It looks like Remuel, I hope I pronounced that right. You're the last question in the Q&A. There are some DSPs not reporting on the MLC, like Claro Musica, and I'm not familiar with them. How can I get information about them? So if in the US a service is operating where someone based in the US can stream your music and they are not signed up for the blanket license, so this is a streaming service operating in the US that is not signed up for the blanket license, their only option then is to directly license the rights from you and to pay you royalties directly. If they're not doing that, then you can sue them. So if they're not reporting to us and they're not under the blanket, then they need to have that direct relationship with you or with someone that you've chosen. And so I would start with your partner, or I would contact the service directly. But it could be that that service is not operating in the US. It could be that they're operating outside the US. So a streaming service that operates in only Latin America or South America, they don't have to operate under the blanket license unless they are operating in the US. And there are definitely services now that start up in other countries before they start up in the US. So you may be aware of that service. They may be using your songs, streaming your songs in other markets, but until they're operating here, they don't have to make that decision to operate under the blanket license with the MLC or to operate under direct licenses. And even then, there are some legal things they have to do. It's not even that simple for them. But hopefully that gives you a little more information. We got to 0, and then we had a couple follow-on, so let's try to get those two. Will, any headway with the American Music Fairness Act? Will artists ever receive terrestrial radio royalties? Great question. I want to be clear for anybody here who isn't familiar with that. That is a law that a number of rights holder organizations have been pushing that would create a right for sound recording owners and performers. So this is on the other side of the business from the MLC, sound recording owners, allow them to receive royalties when their songs, or their sound recordings, I should say, are played on terrestrial radio. That is a gap in the copyright law in the United States that has existed for 100 years, and many people think it's a huge oversight. Sound Exchange is very much involved in the push to get that law passed. Not surprisingly, because they already deal with the digital radio companies and collect digital performance radio royalties for you. The law has not been passed. I don't know if any progress has been made in this current session of Congress. It has certainly gotten further in the last year or two than it's gotten before, but I'm not aware that its passage is imminent at this point. So I would say keep following that story with Sound Exchange. They talk a lot about it. They're doing great advocacy work around that law. That's something that they're allowed to do. We don't get involved in that because, again, it involves sound recording rights, not song rights. But it's a great question to ask, and hopefully they'll be successful, and then you will get yet another royalty stream as a sound recording owner or performer. There was one other that disappeared, so I'm assuming that we answered that. I hope that that was the case.
I think that was getting answered by somebody on the staff. At MLC. It looks like we have finished up all the questions, and gosh, I think a lot of people hung with us this whole time, and gosh, thank you all for being with us. And Chris, thank you so much for such a great explanation and conversation today about the MLC. So glad that I got to join you.
Well, thank you. Again, it's a pleasure to work with you and to get your input. And for all of you as writers, know that you have phenomenally successful, talented, and smart writers like Jen, who are involved with everything that we do to make sure that it works for you. We are committed to making sure it works for you. So if you have questions, if things could be better and you have suggestions for how they can be better, please call our support team. We've done a ton of work over the last 18 months to enhance the initial set of tools that we have built for you, and we continue to build more tools. So we're here to make this work for you. Please engage with us. Let us know what we can do, and we'll hope to see you on another webinar, or even better, in an event in person sometime soon. So again, follow us on social media, reach out to the support team, and thanks so much for joining us today and spending a little time with the MLC.